Good Saturday morning to you. It's great to come back to you again on this Matthew study number 71 as we continue our study of Matthew chapter 5, the Beatitudes, the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. Speaking of sermons, let's just remind you again that on Sunday we don't do the Matthew Bible study because I am putting a sermon together that we do for our own church, Church Requel. I do make it a habit of publishing that sermon and putting it out on the web on Sunday morning as well. So you're more than welcome to check out churchrequel.com or churchrequel.org to listen to the sermon. Of course, if you're anywhere within the Mansfield area, let me make a personal invitation to you to join us at Church Requel for worship and for study time. It has been a great joy to see how God is continuing to bless our very new, very small, but growing congregation. Well, let's get back to our Matthew Bible study for this Saturday morning, shall we? Because to be honest with you, I ran out of time yesterday. I wanted to get to this thought of what meekness was and how it's kind of an in-between word, and I just couldn't get to it. So let's get to it here this morning, shall we? And let's start again by just reading the Beatitudes that we have studied so far, beginning in verse 2 of Matthew chapter 5. And he, Jesus, opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Now, one of the problems that we struggle with here, I think, is that when we get to the third blessing here, we have a word that is more of an in-between word, where the first two blessings talk about a very extreme word. Again, when just to remind you, in case you didn't have a chance to check out Matthew study number 70, when we get to this idea of mourning, I got to get some new lights, no doubt about it. When we get to this idea of poor, blessed are the poor, this is the extreme word for poor, someone who's destitute, someone who is absolute abject poverty of spirit, someone who does not have the Spirit within themselves but relies fully upon the Spirit of God. Blessed are those who mourn. There are 9 different Greek words for mourning, and this is the most extreme of all. That someone who is deeply sorrowful, mourning for someone who they have that they have lost. And we talked about the idea that up till now there's this non-biblical proverb that all sunshine makes a desert, that we need some mourning in our life to deepen the life experience. But then we get to this idea of the meek, and where the word poor and the word mourning are at the extreme ends of the spectrum when it comes to word, this idea of meek is not. Thus, sometimes we have this concept of meek being spinelessness, subservient, submissive, someone who is ineffective, someone who has no will of their own. Actually, the word meek here, pros, is one of the great Greek ethical words. Now, please hear me here. I am not suggesting that Jesus is basing what he is teaching upon Aristotle. Okay? So I'm not confusing the two. What I am saying is that when Matthew, or the writer of Matthew, is translating Jesus' words, and so, there have been several decades that have gone by, and he's looking for the tools of his language, which in this case is Greek. He is reaching for a word that in his mind comes the closest to what Jesus himself has taught. And so when we get to this word pros, I think it helps us to understand what the Greeks meant when they were looking at this. And so there's really 3 different concepts. We'll get to maybe a couple of them today, and maybe we'll get to the third on Monday. One is this idea of being kind of in the middle when it comes to the right amount of anger. Now, let me explain what I mean by this. Aristotle, when he was teaching, taught that sometimes being in the middle of two excesses is where you want to be. For example, and again, this doesn't have anything to do with Meek. You'll see where I'm going here in just a moment. On one end of the spending spectrum, there would be the spendthrift who would just spend everything on anything at any time. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have the miser who never spends anything for anybody, including himself. Well, right in the middle is where you want to be. You want to be generous. You don't want to be a spendthrift. You don't want to be a miser, right? So this idea of pros is this concept of really the right amount of anger, not somebody who is excessively angry all the time about anything and everything, but someone who on the other side of the coin is also not angerless or doesn't experience angerlessness, if there is such a word. In other words, he has someone who has just the right amount of anger. And really here, I think it would be angry on behalf of someone else, not just for themselves. So we might have this concept when it comes to meekness and employing one's strength in the right way. Blessed is the man who is always angry in the right way at always the right time for the right reasons, and never at the wrong time for or in the wrong way with the wrong reasons. We also have this idea when it comes to meekness of a word as a word for someone, an animal who is domesticated, an animal who is trained to obey, someone who listens for and obeys a word of command. So we might have this idea when it comes to meekness. Blessed is the man whose every instinct, whose every impulse, whose every passion is under control. Now, where we would certainly find a great deal of difference in terms of the Greek understanding of this word, and certainly what Jesus is talking about here when we come to Matthew 5, is that the Greeks would understand this as being under self-control, under keeping one's passions under the lid and letting them out just at the right time, just for the right reasons, in the right way, okay? But Jesus here, clearly in terms of talking about blessed are those who are poor in spirit, blessed are those who are mourning, is giving this idea that in and of ourselves we don't have the right ability to be able to do this. And so we rely upon God's strength for the control that we have. In other words, blessed is the man who has this great strength that comes from God, who listens to God, who waits upon God's command in order to be able to use this great strength. I hope that this helps you a little bit to understand that when we're reading through these words and we come to a word like poor and it's the extreme, and we come to the word of mourning and it's the extreme, we come to this idea of meek. And meek is a balance. Not too strong, not too weak, but just right. I hope you have a great Sunday tomorrow. I hope you enjoy your weekend. And I look forward to getting to the third idea and bringing this all together in terms of meekness when we meet again on Monday.